Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I am pleased to welcome you for the third session of this webinar series entitled An Introduction to Biologic GMP Manufacturing, Preparing for Early Phase Clinical Trials. I would like to welcome you on behalf of our partners at BioCanRx and Stem Cell Network, and on behalf of my colleagues at the NRC, the National Research Council of Canada. My name is Freya Verkouteren. I'm the Program Manager of the Cell and Gene Therapy Challenge Program at the NRC, and I will be facilitating today's session. Today, we will focus on when and how to engage a contract development and manufacturing organization, or CDMO, for the good manufacturing practice, or GMP, manufacturing of your lead candidate. Slide 2, please. First, I would like to acknowledge that the NRC has offices and research labs across the country, which are located on unceded, shared, current, and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples. The NRC headquarters is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I encourage all participants to learn about the land they are currently situated on through native-land.ca. If you know on which land you're located, I invite you to acknowledge it in chat. And we at NRC recognize our privilege to be able to conduct research and drive innovation for many years now. And we pay respect to the peoples who were here long before us. It is our responsibility, in the spirit of reconciliation, to improve our understanding of local Indigenous communities and their cultures. I would like to thank our partners at BioCanRx and Stem Cell Network and my colleagues at NRC for organizing this webinar series. BioCanRx, Stem Cell Network, and NRC, in fact, share the vision of improving lives of patients across Canada, strengthening the Canadian ecosystem, and training the next generation of scientists. The NRC is a government organization that works together with Canadian and international academics, with SMEs, with CDMOs, funding agencies, Health Canada, etc., for the preclinical development and evaluation of biologics, including antibodies, vaccines, and cell and gene therapies. In particular, in the context of our CGT Challenge program, we work together with Canada-wide academic collaborators and industry partners to drive the development of tools and platforms and to help build up the Canadian ecosystem in order to accelerate the clinical path for safer, accessible cell and gene therapies. Ultimately, our goal is to help transform health outcomes for Canadians suffering from cancer and genetic diseases. Concretely, we are developing and manufacturing a made-in-Canada gene therapy and a CAR-T therapy. We are also developing a variety of platforms and tools for lean biomanufacturing of cell and gene therapies. For example, iPSCs for allogeneic CGT products, and high-throughput gene editing tools and platforms, as well as targeted lipid nanoparticles and solid tumor CARs. I also would like to mention that as of May 2024, our newly built clinical trials manufacturing facility will be able to offer cGMP manufacturing of material for clinical trial phase 1 and 2. For further information on NRC capabilities, please do not hesitate to contact us through our website. Slide 4, please. So please note that today's session is being recorded. The recording of the 3 sessions can be found on the YouTube channel of Stem Cell Network, and a link to the videos will be posted in the chat box. A few housekeeping notes for our session today. If you have any questions related to the discussed topics, you may add your questions to the Q&A box. They will be answered during the Q&A sessions following the 3 presentations. If you are having technical difficulties, you can notify us during the chat function, using the chat function. This session will be recorded and available on Stem Cell Network's YouTube channel, as I mentioned before. Slide 6, please. So the expertise of our audience is likely very diverse. So we will now be taking some audience polls just to see where folks are coming from and what your expertise is in biologics development and manufacturing. And this is going to help our speakers to gauge their comments during the Q&A sessions. So first of all, what sector do you primarily come from? So academia, government, private sector, or other? How confident are you in transitioning your product to clinical grade GMP manufacture? And what type of biologic are you developing? So let's have a look at the results. It's great to see that many of you come from academia and private sector, and that also the government is being represented. And further, for the second question, we hope that these information sessions are going to help you become more confident on transitioning your product to clinical grade GMP manufacture. And many of you work in a cell and gene therapy field. So this is really great to see. So thank you for the information. And then on slide 7, we'll see that in this session, our speakers will be discussing how and when to engage a CDMO and what to expect when engaging a CDMO, how to choose a CDMO, and what are the responsibilities of the researcher or the sponsor in general versus the CDMO. So slide 8. So with that, I would like to welcome today's speakers, Dr. Jennifer Queasy, Mrs. Gail Piat, and Mr. Cédric Héroux. So our first two speakers today are Dr. Jennifer Queasy and Mrs. Piat. Dr. Queasy is a director of the Ottawa Virus Manufacturing Facility and an investigator at OHRI. Her areas of expertise are biomanufacturing, process optimization, specifically as it pertains to virus-based therapeutics. Dr. Queasy is co-PI of the National CanPrime Biomanufacturing Training Program and holds the position of Director of Biotherapeutics Manufacturing Operations at BioCanRx. And as you know, BioCanRx is a network of centers of excellence focused on the development, the clinical testing, and commercialization of novel biotherapeutics for cancer treatment. In her capacity as Director of the Biotherapeutics Manufacturing Center Virus Manufacturing Facility, she is responsible for providing sustainable and affordable access to manufacturing for biologic therapies to academic, governmental, and industry clients. This access has led to the clinical GMP manufacture of more than 20 discrete biologic therapies to treat a wide range of disease indications from cancer to infectious and rare disease in phase 1 to 3 clinical trials, both within Canada and abroad, so in the US, Europe, and Asia. Then it is my pleasure also to introduce the second speaker, Mrs. Gail Piat. She has a background in medical laboratory technology and has over 30 years of experience working in life sciences, with 12 years spent specializing in good laboratory practices and 12 years in good manufacturing practice. While working at the Alberta Research Council as a quality assurance manager in a GLP tox facility, she earned her designation as Registered Quality Assurance Professional in GLP through the Society of Quality Assurance in 2003. In 2011, Gail joined the University of Alberta as project manager for the construction of a GMP cell and gene therapy manufacturing facility and is now director of the Alberta Cell Therapy Manufacturing. In 2016, she earned Regulatory Affairs certification through the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. Gail is an active member of the Canadian biomanufacturing ecosystem, including serving as a board member for the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, Canadian affiliate. and committee member in ISPE Canada's Women in Pharma Committee. With that, Dr. Kwesi and Mrs. Piat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. If you'll just bear with us for one quick second while I share the screen. Did I get a thumbs up? You can see my screen? Or yes?
Jen, is there a way you can change your view? We're getting like a...
Getting the little wee?
Yeah.
1 second, let's try that again.
That's perfect.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Sarah. All right. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak to the organizers, BioConnectX, NRC, and Stem Cell. Myself and Gail, we have quite the extensive experience working with one another in our professional capacities. And so we thought when we were asked to do this that we would take a team approach to providing this presentation to everyone here. And so this is going to be somewhat of an iterative presentation going back and forth between myself and Gail. And I think we're going to, if I can find the control here, I can't seem to find where to turn off my camera, so I guess I'm going to keep mine on because I can't seem to do that when I'm sharing my screen. But Gail, if you want to turn yours off, you're welcome to, or you can stay on with me as well.
Oh, I'll keep you company. I'll keep it on.
So much. All right. So we've been asked to discuss somewhat of a broad topic here, the when and how to engage a CDMO. Please keep in mind, we're going to take this from a very high level perspective. We did prepare this in anticipation that the vast majority of the folks attending would be from academic backgrounds. But I think what we've kind of selected to share with you today will be highly representative, regardless of where you are coming from in terms of, important concepts to understand in interacting with contract development and manufacturing organizations. Let's see, there we go. All right, so you've either been languishing in your laboratories for long, hard hours, or within your companies, and you finally have stumbled upon that innovation. You're seeing something tremendous, and you think that there is a very high likelihood that there could be therapeutic benefit, and you want to test this in the clinic. What next? If you don't know the question, or if you don't know the answer to that question, this is very much where you want to engage subject matter experts. Recognizing for a lot of people, the first time you do this, this is a very unknown area. And so really, and this is going to be a common thread, I think, in a lot of what myself and Gail are going to be discussing, how critical it is to surround yourself with a team of people that have expertise that's complementary to yours. Oftentimes, as the innovator, as the person who has discovered whatever it is that you've discovered, that product inside and out from that research perspective. And it's okay that you don't know every other little thing that needs to be known about it when it comes to then taking that and translating it to something that's suitable and safe, frankly, to be tested in the clinic. So when you engage with a contract development and manufacturing organization, be prepared, again, as I mentioned, that you may think you know your product, but we're really going to be pushing you to the ends of getting to know this product. There'll be lots of questions that are put in front of you, like, what is it that you have developed? Is this a biologic? What type of biologic, if it is? What type of patient population are you going to want to treat with this biologic? Do you have an idea of the dosing? Why are you doing this? Is this for patients who are terminal with no other option? Or are you administering this product to somebody who is otherwise healthy? All these questions are important things to start ruminating about because they will ultimately impact the way you engage with your CDMO. They will help determine, when it comes to the development of a process, which path you want to take. Because again, all these sorts of things are with the thought in mind of getting something that is safe and suitable to be tested into the clinic. So what exactly is a CDMO, or a contract development and manufacturing organization? Ultimately, it's a service provider. There's different types of CDMO. Myself and Gail, we're from CDMOs that operate within the purview of an academic institute. We'll tell you a little bit more about our organizations, but just to say that these academically embedded CDMOs are not academic. We are compliant with the regulatory requirements to manufacture. So, just by virtue of where we're located, don't let that fool you. But of course, more traditional CDMOs are from industry. Some ones that come to mind, maybe like Lonza. I know Wuxi Aptec is starting to do contract development manufacturing activities as well. Resilience and NRC, as was mentioned earlier in the introduction. You have different types of CDMOs depending on what their specialty is. So you will have ones that are focused more on the biologics manufacturing side. You can have small molecule CDMOs as well. And you will have CDMOs that are focused on different stages of the development of your product. Now, this is incredibly important. When you first have your discovery, you are looking to test this in early phase clinical trials. So the facilities you are engaging with are not GMP facilities. They manufacture in compliance with GMP. And this might sound like a bit of a nuanced point, but the big difference here is that there's no accreditation to those facilities, nor does there need to be. It's an acknowledgement that for these early phase products, you are manufacturing something where you don't know everything there is to know just yet about the product, its specification, or how to make it. And we'll get into this in more detail throughout this presentation. As a result, these facilities that manufacture for these early phase clinical trials tend to be a lot more nimble. These are the facilities that probably manufacture a variety of different product platforms. For instance, in my facility, we manufacture, a number of different types of.
Thank you for calling Ottawa Building and Foundation Repair. Our office hours are Monday to Friday,
Bravo.
9 a.m. to 4 p.m.
I think you need
If
to
you know your party's extension, please dial it now. To leave.
Cool. So just to take a step back there. So these these facilities manufacture for early phase clinical trials, they are more nimble because they don't manufacture the same thing over and over and over again, typically. The process, so if you do have a product within one of these facilities that is manufactured multiple times, the process, while it is set when you're in production for any one given production run, when you go to run it a second time, you're looking likely to develop and innovate and improve on that process for the next time you run it. This is in direct contrast with these commercial facilities. By the time you're manufacturing probably the later stage product, so absolutely for a phase 3, and then of course a commercially approved product, you're running the process the exact same way every single time. These are in facilities that do have those regulatory approvals or certificates of compliance. And again, as a result, you don't have these facilities typically with the same level of nimbleness. It might be a handful, if that, of processes that they run in dedicated facilities or suites. And one other big difference between these different types of CDMOs is usually the scale. For early phase clinical material, you can get away with making, tens of doses, maybe 100 doses of the material, because you're going to be using, this material for an early phase clinical trial, which has a lot fewer patients. But of course, as you scale that up, you also show the robustness of your process, the scalability of your process, because ultimately, if you're going to go for commercial approval, you have to show that you can manufacture this, again, in a robust sort of way. Activities at the CDMOs, again, kind of pushing this back more towards for the investigational facilities. You have process and assay development. So when you provide a product, you do have a process the way you made it in the lab that may not be amenable to actually being used in a GMP facility. And so it's taking what you've given us, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we touch on tech transfer, but taking what you've given us and turning it into a process that is amenable to being used in the GMP facility. Assay development is developing some of these product-specific assays that are critical to confirming through QC release testing after you've made your product that you have actually made what you set out to make and certain specifications of that product. These facilities will be able to provide you that GMP compliant manufacturing capabilities. Some might even be able to provide you some of the analytics testing. So they might develop assays and they can either technology transfer that to another contract research organization, or then qualify that so that they can use them in-house as official QC GMP release tests. And then other things like stability studies. So to have a program to show that the biologic that you have made over time maintains its potency and remains to be, you know, effective in what you anticipate it doing. When it comes to when to engage with a CDMO, this is really a bit of very, very much your personal experience and product dependent. For instance, with some levels, with some industry, with organizations perhaps like the NRC, you know, you might be capable of doing a bunch of the upfront process development on your own. And so you'd be looking to engage with a CDMO once you have a relatively solid process. I would say, though, that you'd want to be engaging with your prospective CDMO from the onset, again, to make sure that you're aligned on what is feasible within the context of actual GMP production. We've worked with companies also that have an idea and want us to engineer a virus for them and then take it through to developing the process and doing production. So really much from the very, very get-go of the whole process, and a number of things in between. We've had groups come to us to do just one component of manufacturing, like the aseptic fill or putting your product into the final vessel that would then be what is shipped to the clinic to be given to a patient. So again, the engagement, at what stage do you engage with the CDMO? Always good to have a conversation as early on as possible, but then taking the information you gain there, applying it to your own situation to figure out, okay, then when do I really functionally work with the CDMO, having them work with us to move this project along. In line with this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CDMO that I work for, and then I'm going to pass it over to Gail to do the same, because the perspectives that we're going to be sharing with you are going to be very much framed within what it is that we do. Again, we try to make this as high level as possible, but for instance, I will probably be using examples that are more specific to virus-based therapeutics, because that's what I do at the Biotherapeutics Manufacturing Center, specifically within the virus manufacturing facility. So we are a full service CDMO that has been manufacturing biologics, specifically these therapeutic viruses, for the last 15 years. We started off manufacturing oncolytic viruses or cancer killing viruses, but also make gene therapy vectors. We've been involved in live virus vaccine campaigns as well. And as was mentioned in the bio, you know, the drugs that we manufacture here are used in those early phase clinical studies, both in Canada and around the world. Because our products are used around the world, we are compliant with a number of different regulatory bodies, so FDA, EMA, and of course Health Canada. And to make this work, again, we're within the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. We've got more than 40 highly qualified staff, and this includes some of our students in this very unique, or I guess first of its kind, hands-on training program to give experience to students what it means to work in a biomanufacturing facility. With that, I'm just going to pass it over to Gail.
Hi, everyone. So I am the director of ACTM, or Alberta Cell Therapy Manufacturing, and we're located at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. We've been operational since about 2016. We have a 10,000 square foot clean room facility that was purpose-built. It's a beautiful facility. When people come to tour it in an academic center, they are quite often really surprised at how beautiful the facility is. It's quite remarkable. So we manufacture GMP compliant cell therapy products for early phase clinical trials. So our clients come from all across Canada. We're really focused on academic clients. Our goal is to help transition those projects that are from the bench to the clinic, so to speak, but also startup companies, et cetera, a lot of spin-off companies from universities. So we recently added aseptic fill finish services for a variety of biological products. So it doesn't just have to be cell therapy products. So currently we have a semi-automated system where we can manually fill, but we received funding recently from the Alberta government to purchase a robotic, fully automated system. and we will be installing that early 2025, and we'll be able to fill about 2,800 vials a day when that's up and running, and it's in an isolator and fully, as I mentioned, robotic and automated with 2 robotic arms to increase the safety of the final product. So we're really dividing our talk into 3 buckets of information, so to speak. So roles and responsibilities, so who's who, and then technology transfer, and then finally documentation and communication, which is a big part of GMP and working with a CDMO. So we'll start out with roles and responsibilities. So I think one thing that Jen and I, when we talk back and forth, we always say this is a team sport. And so the people that come together to finalize getting ready for a clinical trial are really the regulators, so like Health Canada or FDA, the sponsor, the service providers who could be the CDMOs or an analytical testing facility or a regulatory consultant, and then the vendors, the people who are supplying the equipment, the raw materials, the starting materials for your product. So to further just clarify who's who, in the GMPs, they actually really talk about the different parties involved, and there's definitions that talk about those. So the sponsor is the person who decides to do the clinical trial. So if it's an academic center, they would be the sponsor. It lists manufacturer, and this can be a little bit of a confusing point because a lot of people think the manufacturer is the CDMO, whoever's manufacturing the product. But remember that GMPs are written for a commercial drug product, and a manufacturer is the association who actually sells the drug. So that is deemed as the manufacturer. Qualified investigator, that's the person that the sponsor would designate to conduct the clinical trial, and they are entitled to provide healthcare to the patients under the provincial laws where the clinical trial site is located. And then there's another kind of confusing role, I think, that we want to really define is the difference between regulatory and quality assurance, because a lot of times people use those interchangeably. And so often we get clients coming to us and asking regulatory questions because we seemingly know all the answers, and that is not true. So quality assurance from the CDMO or even within a sponsored company, their responsibility is to oversee compliance with the relevant regulatory requirements, such as GMP. So they would look at it from a phase appropriateness level, like is it phase 1 or is it a commercial product? The product type, so which regulations are you following and which patient population you're going into. Whereas regulatory is more of a holistic look at following regulatory compliance. So it could be anything from the clinical trials that you're running, the labeling requirements, what specifications you're setting for your product. They know the whole picture from a higher level rather than just looking at one specific part of the project, which might be the manufacturing component. So if you don't have that expertise within your group, it is very highly recommended that you hire a consultant to help you out with that. Because a lot of times when you ask us at the CDMO a question, we might go back and say, well, what does your regulatory person say? Because it's not really up to us to make those really high level decisions. If you look at dose level, stability plan, all those sorts of things. So if you haven't looked at it already, it's a really good idea to look at Guide 001, Good Manufacturing Practices Guide at Health Canada. And it doesn't just talk about what you have to do to be GMP compliant as far as the manufacturing. It does also have a huge section about outsourcing activities. So it's important to know that the sponsor is responsible for the GMP compliance of the product manufacturing, whether you're doing it yourself. If you were a pharma company, you might have your own manufacturing facility in-house, or if you're outsourcing it. So the outsource activities, as Jen mentioned, it could involve the process development and the analysis, or it could be the GMP manufacturing of the product itself. But what's important to know is that there should be a well-defined and agreed upon requirements upfront, and these should be supported by written agreements. And so there's different types of agreements. One of them is a service agreement, and that's more of the contractual agreement between the two parties. What's the scope of work? How much is it going to cost? What's the payment terms, etc. And the quality agreement, which I'll go into in a little more depth, is more about how do you define the roles and responsibilities between the sponsor and the CDMO as far as GMP compliance goes. And these outsource activities, of course, should be looked at through the lens of phase appropriateness. Is it a phase 1 or is it a phase 3? And also the jurisdiction of use. Are you going to be doing your clinical trial in Canada, US, Europe? Those things will matter because the rules and the regulations vary between those different jurisdictions. So some more definitions. So the GMPs actually talk about the contractor. So that's the legal entity that carries out the activities on behalf of the company or the sponsor, according to the written agreement. And then they use terms contract acceptor and contract giver. So the contract acceptor would be the CDMO, and the contract giver would be the sponsor in this case. So a little bit about auditing. So as mentioned, the sponsor is responsible for the overall GMP compliance of the production of the material. So it's a good idea to actually audit the CDMO and not just take their word for it that yes, we follow all applicable GMPs. So if you don't have auditing expertise within your own organization, this is where you can also outsource and actually have a consultant do the audit for you. And keep in mind that auditing a CDMO is more than just a facility tour. It is actually looking at all of the documentation and the procedures that they have in place, what equipment they have in place, the facility itself, and ensuring that it meets all requirements. This would also be true for any testing facilities where you're getting any analytical testing done if the CDMO isn't doing all of that testing. And you want to look at your critical raw material vendors as well. So now a little bit about the contract giver. So these points are taken right out of the GMPs as well. So as you can see, the sponsor is supposed to ensure that there are processes in place to control the outsourced activities, and that's with those written agreements and the auditing that I mentioned. Your quality system. So the regulators are also expecting that the sponsor has a quality system. It would probably be more of an administrative quality system, but it talks about how you're going to control and review your outsourced activities. And then also that includes the continuing assessment, and not just at the beginning, but throughout the whole process of working with the outsourced contracts. And you want to make sure that you provide all of the information that the contract group will need to perform the operations correctly. So it's about transparency, and it's even about sharing things that you might have struggled with, because all of that transparency will in the end help the CDMO do their work more efficiently and get to the end result of a better product. You also want to make sure that you communicate any hazards that there might be with the product or the testing for the CDMO. And also, the sponsor is responsible for monitoring and reviewing and assessing the records. So you should actually ask for copies of the batch records the executed batch records, the assays. If you're getting testing outsourced, don't just stop at getting the final report of the results from that testing organization. Ask to review the raw data as well. That's how you really start to monitor the process and understand how the testing took place, and also to know if there were any issues that happened during any of the manufacturing or the testing. So now the CDMO, or the contract receiver, should carry out the work ordered by the contract giver, and should ensure that there's the adequate premises and equipment and knowledge and expertise and adequate personnel available to do the project, and ensure that all the products, materials, and knowledge are delivered, and that you're going to be able to execute the project appropriately. And that if the CDMO is going to subcontract any of the work, that should be done with the sponsor's prior approval. So if a CDMO doesn't have the capability to do all the testing that you need, and they're going to subcontract it, you should absolutely know that in advance and approve that subcontractor's work as well as part of the whole package. And the CDMO should not be making any unauthorized changes outside of the terms of the contract that would affect the quality. And later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about documentation and communication, and that's where we'll go into a little more depth on this. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jen, and she's going to talk about tech transfer.
Great. And just to say that Gail and I might jump in when the other's talking from time to time with additional little tidbits here and there where we can kind of speak to our own personal experience to augment some of the content that we're providing here. So as far as what is tech transfer? So tech transfer can mean a couple of different things. It could be as simple as you as an inventor of some sort of new discovery is going to be providing all the information that you have about, you know, what it is that you've invented, plus the process that you've used to make it to date, to a contract development and manufacturing organization like mine or Gail's. It can also mean, you know, from the prospect of, you know, both Gail and I, we manufacture for early phase clinical trials. We've both worked with companies or organizations where their need has outgrown our capacity. And this is a good thing. And this is because, you know, the whatever the product was that we've made has then been, you know, shown positive results, and they're taking it to those later stage clinical trials and on to commercialization. So in that respect, the technology transfer is from the CDMO, from the initial CDMO, so let's say mine or Gail's facility, and then to a larger organization that has the capacity, you know, more likely than not the scale. And then of course, you know, with the ability and line of sight to, if that product does get approved for use, being able to commercially manufacture. So for tech transfer to occur successfully, it is critical that you are completely upfront and provide as much information as you can about your product and process to date. We've worked with organizations or groups in the past, you know, that frankly don't have a lot of information. That's fine. The reality though with that is that it will take a lot more time for us to look to best fit your product with a process that we already have in-house, basically, to have that sort of baseline test. Let's check the feasibility, you know, the smallest scale of using one of our existing processes and how that would translate to, you know, your product's ability to be manufactured. Other times we work with organizations where they haven't given as much information, and it honestly could just be a function of you didn't think to give that sort of information. We've become, I think, quite good at being able to prod you with the specific questions to get that information. But the reality is that even if you've tried something and it failed, that's important information for groups like ours to understand, because then either we can understand, you know, why you did it and why you don't want to pursue it again, you know, perhaps the way you initially tried it. We could try it again in a different sort of way. The idea is that you don't want to duplicate efforts. If there's a reason why you don't want to do something one way, you know, that sort of thing is very important for us to know. The other reality is you may not know. So again, having a very transparent and open discussion with your CDMO about everything you know about your product is super helpful, because ultimately it helps us narrow down, what we want to tackle first. And ultimately it does help us move along the process faster and less expensively. When you're developing a process, and so I have here, the changes in materials or scale can result in process variability. This is super important. Again, you might have started to develop a process in your lab that works perfectly fine in the lab, but is something that's just not achievable in our GMP facilities. It could be that our GMP doesn't have a piece of equipment that you have in your lab. This is oftentimes solved by us just buying the piece of equipment, of course, having to get the funding to do that. But sometimes certain processes are just not amenable to GMP. And so we have to look for workarounds. So for instance, you could have a purification step that lasts 12 hours. Well, if you tag that on to the fact that we're already in the GMP for 4 or 5 hours before that, you're looking at a 17-hour day for our production operators. And you don't want our production staff, no matter how good they are, in that clean room, dressed from head to toe in their PPE for 17 hours, because when people get tired, that's when mistakes happen. So changing, the materials or the scale also have unintended consequences. So oftentimes, you think you could substitute something out in the downs or in the upstream, and then people are shocked that when we get down to the purification side of things, that, oh my goodness, we all of a sudden are losing all of our product at whatever step, maybe tangential flow filtration. So this is, again, where during the technology transfer, we want to make sure that we're very clearly taking a very methodical approach. One, again, using all the information that you've provided us, leveraging that and existing processes to test the feasibility of your product in an existing system. And then more importantly, moving forward in terms of, okay, now what do we do next? So I'm sure for most folks here, where biologics are your focus, that you've heard this terminology that, for biologics manufacturing, the process is the product. I think this is very much in line with the fact that biologics are so complicated to make, and you're using, one or more living systems to make the drug at the end of the day. And so the process really is what your focus is going to be on. And again, you may come to a CDMO like myself or Gail with a process that's completely sorted out. It could be amenable for GMP, and really all we have to do then is take that process, validate it in our hands with our operators, making sure that we understand all the instructions, and then we move right into production. That's not typically the sort of situation we encounter when we're helping to develop early phase clinical material. Most likely we are dealing with products that are, do not have those processes fleshed out. And so this is every step that we're trying to figure out. How do we best grow it upstream so that we can have, optimize the amount of whatever it is? And then how do we best purify it so that it is suitable to be used in a clinical setting? Some other considerations as part of the tech transfer, it's a little bit subsequent to the actual moving of information from one group to another, is that a lot of times you do have to be careful that R&D doesn't always scale to GMP. I think I've mentioned this already a couple of times, that one process, while good in the lab, may not be workable in a GMP, but it's also the scale. So working with a CDMO that has in their process development, so more their R&D side of things, scalable bioreactors, scalable purification equipment is really quite useful, because it allows you to test out your process parameters at a lower cost, and allow you to tweak things, try out different situations, but then be confident that because it's the same equipment that you're using, that you are actually going to be able to have a reasonable expectation that when you do scale it up, that you will get a similar result. Of course, you do want to validate that, and that is usually the function of these engineering runs. And engineering runs are usually what generate the material that you are then going to use to run your toxicology studies, as well as validate your process for GMP. So when it comes to the technology transfer, I guess really just having that early engagement with your CDMO on the process development front, you want to make sure that you are evaluating the process and the analytical methods early. to determine if any changes are needed. And likely the answer is yes, you're going to have to make changes. It's also, I think, really important that you do talk to your prospective CDMO before you do your toxicology studies. The reason for this is that you want to make sure that the process that you use for the engineering run, or whatever run you want to call it, that's generating the material for your toxicology studies, very closely emulates what you'll be doing in production. That way you can draw a very discrete line from the process we use for this material that was tested in animals is the same or near to it, the process that we're going to use to manufacture the material that's going to go into people for the subsequent clinical trial. As part of the technology transfer, I think we already kind of covered this, is that, you know, the main function here is that the CDMO will work with you to review what you've done so far and see how they can take that and apply that to their existing processes to come up with a plan forward. And again,
just a
Yep.
note, Jen, I guess I got a message that we're running overtime, so we might.
oh, I thought we had till 1, Sarah.
No, we have till 1 till the panel discussion starts, but we need to start Cédric's presentation.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
No,
We were under the impression that we had to 1. Okay, so how do you want to tackle this, Gail? I think we're going to skip through the next few things.
Yeah.
Not talk about let's quickly talk about, can we have like 3 more minutes, Sarah? We can go through documentation, or 5 minutes documentation, and then we'll go to like the final thoughts.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. All right, Gail, I'm going to throw it back to you then for documentation and communication.
Okay, perfect. So we'll go through this really quickly. We already talked about service agreements and quality agreements, but there's a whole bunch of documentation that's going to happen. That is, the documentation is generated at the CDMO. And I think the point of this is just be aware there's going to be a bunch of documents coming to you for review, and in some cases approval. And so you'll want to know who in your organization has the expertise to actually review these documents appropriately. There might be more than one person, and who should actually sign off on them. Next slide. So the service agreement, the long and the short of this is a legal agreement, so less to do with GMP. You should have a procurement strategy also. So Jen, do you want to just quickly mention that?
Yeah, so really quickly at the very end, we'll show you, you know, a perspective how much it could cost to manufacture. It absolutely will exceed most academic institutions' 100K limit. And so you need to have an idea of how you're going to actually engage the services of CDMO, whether it's through, you know, some sort of fund transfer agreement, working through a grant with an organization like Gail's or mine, or it is having to go for a request for proposal, which could take a really long time. So just an important component to be aware of, because this could have an impact on your timelines and basically your approach.
And we've already talked about the quality agreement, but there is a really good guidance document from the FDA about quality agreements. But essentially, this is a negotiation between the quality units, between the CDMO and the sponsor, to say who's who for GMP compliance. So nothing falls between the cracks. So it's really, what's the CDMO responsible for? What's the sponsor responsible for GMP compliance? Controlled documents. So this is all about the GMP compliance documentation. So again, there's a whole bunch of documents that need to be signed off. And once they're signed off, you have to use change control to change them. So just be aware, lots of documentation. I'm sure you already know that. Communication, this is key.
Maybe
So
you
you
can
want
this one, Gail, because we'll get to that maybe for the takeaway points.
Sure.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to skip through that, and I want to flash this really quickly at you. This is using a therapeutic virus as an example. Keep in mind that if this is for a cell product, it would be very different. But in terms of, you know, working with a CDMO to manufacture a drug product suitable to be used in a clinical trial, it's expensive. This is probably a bit of an underestimate of cost, and the reason for that is that it doesn't include other important activities like stability studies, release testing. So in this case, release testing is required at every step of production there for the MCB, master cell bank, virus bank, bulk drug substance, and drug product. And then the process development, I purposely left out of that because I was using that example, looking to leverage some existing process very nearly to the same extent. But process development, again, depending on where you start and how much information you have, there's many different permutations and combinations of parameters that you can test to optimize your process. So this is a bit of a black box when it comes to costing, and it can end up being quite significant. So with that, and again, apologies for us running so over. We did think that we had till 1 o'clock, but yeah, maybe if you want to go through the final thoughts here.
Yeah, as Jen mentioned, manufacturing is expensive. You want to create a dream team of expertise. So don't think that one person can have all of this knowledge. You want to tap into different varied expertise along the way. Be open and transparent with your team, including the CDMO. That's very important. That will save time and money. Inform yourself, like going to sessions like this. Read the guidance documents, ask questions. And I think most importantly, or maybe importantly, lessons learned. Don't forget at the end to stop and discuss lessons learned so that you have a smoother path the next time.
Thank you so much for these very clear presentations. If the audience has any questions, please add your questions in the chat box, and our speakers will address them during the Q&A session at the end. Maybe we will not have a lot of time left, that's okay. You also have the option to upvote other attendees' questions with the thumbs up button. Now, our third speaker today is Mr. Cédric Héroux, who is a General Director of Biodextris. So he has over 20 years of management experience in the pharmaceutical and consumer goods industry, with a history of success in developing strategies to increase quality and operational efficiency for different product families and different product development stages, from preclinical to commercial manufacturing. So his experience spans late product development stages, manufacturing, commercial production, and industry strategy, with focus on operational excellence, quality, and regulatory compliance, as well as customer service. His working experiences range from small startup companies to well-established multinational companies. And prior experience includes management and leadership positions with GSK Biologics, Jubilant Radiopharmaceutical, Essilor Groupe Parima, Dow's, and now also Biodextris. So, Monsieur Héroux, with this, I would like to turn over the floor to you.
Thank you, Shreya. Here's my presentation, and I guess I need to hide myself first. Hide self-view and share. I guess this is working, right? All right. Thank you.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm really blessed to be part of this webinar session. I have to admit that when the opportunity came, I just thought it was so nice that this actually exists. I think it was missing in the industry, especially in Canada, just to make sure that all the layers that are involved in product development have a chance to understand each other at every step. I'll be introducing how to work with a CDMO, but from a NRC point of view. Biodextris is a CDMO, specialized in small volumes, high value products. We like to say that we are there to bring your innovation to life. That means bring innovation and make it a product. I think you've heard that in the past seminars as well. This is not a duplicate of the other presentation. Bear with me. I'm really trying to link the CDMO job and deliverables with how NRC will be able to bridge the gaps whenever there is a gap. Biodextris is a small company that was founded in 2015, but we have a very extensive heritage. Actually, most of our, like almost 30% of our employees have been working together for more than 20 years in different companies. So we've seen both sides of the story, being a CDMO, but also engaging with CDMOs. So I think that's also valuable for us as we bring people on board and we work with new companies that have never been there. We know how it is. We've been there before. Okay. Some topics that also came in the previous presentation. You're going to be asking yourself, are you ready for CDMO? I think that by the time that you're asking yourself probably means that it's time to start discussing with a CDMO. If you're asking the question, it's probably today that you need to start doing this. It was mentioned by Gail before, you need to build your dream team. Never underestimate the CMC consultant and the regulatory consultant, as well as a very good psychologist. I can tell you that this is a journey. It's a fun journey, but it's not an easy one. As easy as we're trying to make it, it's not always a smooth ride. Be realistic, be aware of your strength, and acknowledge your weaknesses. This will allow you to surround yourself with people that will help you make the best of your strength and de-risk your weaknesses. Very important. You need to trust the partners that you're going to be working with. This is an easy link with NRC, but I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's Trust Matrix and books. So if you ever want to read this, but keep in mind that there's a concept that's called speed of trust. Trying to speed up your project is never a good idea if you don't plan well and if you're not surrounded by the right people. Okay, and also keep in mind that you're not looking for friends, you're looking for partners. Okay, NRC is one of those partners that you can trust, and I speak with a great, I will say, experience. We've had multiple projects coming from NRC, from innovator company, and I can tell you that it makes a big difference. Okay, NRC has a role to assist and promote the scientific and industrial research in Canada. It's a partner, it's an engine that fuels the development, and they also contribute to the development of the science by generating themselves new technologies and novel technologies. Okay, they support the development of technology, but they also ensure that they're transferred to the industry partner. As much as NRC is also capable of doing some manufacturing, the intent between NRC and eventually commercial production is always to prepare a transfer. So this is something to keep in mind, that NRC develops always with the end result in mind. So they know that they need to document and prepare themselves for a proper transfer. What does it mean? Is as a partner, NRC is connected to industry players, has access to a bunch of databases as well as academic research. So there are state-of-the-art technologies. They're plugged directly on the latest knowledge in multiple fields. Okay, they are an engine for the technological development. You will have access to technology that you may not be able to afford in your own laboratory. Think of characterizing your products. They have state-of-the-art instrument, state-of-the-art people to use the instruments, and they will help you understand your innovation so it better transfer afterward. There are multiple experts at NRC. They have extensive experience, so they will help you avoid mistakes, and you will benefit from others' mistake as well. And that's priceless, I can tell you, during a process development and transfer. You also gain access to multiple platforms, which is part of the development that NRC is doing is they are developing robust platform, expression platform, product platforms, so that they know these transfer easily. They have their own strains, they have their own technologies. So this is stuff that you can always trust to work because it's been transferred before. Where does NRC can come and partner with you as part of the development and transfer of your product? Well, they can get involved in the cell line development, the process development, characterization of your product, developing some methods. So they often bridge between discovery, R&D, and the preclinical phases. They also support you through the clinical phases 1, 2, and eventually 3. They will not do it for you, but they'll be there. And if you've been involved with them early, well, you can always go back and ask them for support and make sure that they are there with you and that they provide additional information to help you move from one phase to the other. NRC as a partner. What are the signs that you may need support or help? One very good sign is only you understand your innovation. It happens more than you think, where you have your idea, you need to translate it into some way that will be a product afterward. NRC has seen a lot of stuff. They usually understand. If part of your product or technology includes using old lab equipment to perform analysis that they weren't used for that at first, probably works as a lab scale size, but you'll need help to translate that into something that will work in the production world. And there again, NRC can support the technical creation and then using new equipment and our commercially available equipment to do the same functions as what you've been developing in your labs. Sometimes, and there again, it happens more than we think, you might have forgotten the D in searching for a CDMO. CDMO means that there's going to be a development phase. If you engage with a CMO, the development phase might be a bit more difficult. So this is where you might need the NRC to come and play and do that development for you to make sure that the CMO will be able to manufacture your product. Or you just decided to use an experienced partner and someone you trust. It should be your first thought is to not, NRC should not be a last resort. It should be a decision, and it should be there again, a partner that you engage with early. Main benefits will be de-risking your transfer. You're going to have industrial technologies. It's going to be scalable, available, and affordable. They'll help you figure out the best way to get your product to production. They speak the language. We did mention, and I heard from We Can Translate presentation, that we need quality by design. You need target product profile. NRC understand that language, which might not be your day-to-day, but they understand it and they can translate with the future CDMO you're going to be working with. They provide very high quality documentation to help the transfer, batch record, protocols, development reports. This is all stuff that's going to be very useful to speed up your process after. All this translate in increased rate of success, and I will add increased speed. We had the presentation from Jennifer and Gail where we covered quickly some typical CDMO services. Well, as you're going to be transferring, you're going to be doing analytical development and qualification. Well, NRC is going to be able to support the method handover and transfer. As you're going to be doing process dev, you're going to be able, with NRC, to make sure that the technology handover and transfer is done properly. Biomanufacturing, process optimization and development scale-up will be much easier. And eventually, the method qualification, if the development was done properly and the right methods were identified, is going to be a much simpler process with the right partners. Quick slide here. I'm not going to go through all the details, but keep in mind that as you're going to do technology transfer, well, having a process that's robust and provided structured data and transfer protocols is going to make your life much easier when transferring to a CDMO. When you're developing methods and you're going to be trying to transfer them, especially for characterization, there again, structured data, protocols, and using the same and the right words as you're trying to transfer the analytical method will make it much easier for everyone. Process optimization, development, and scale up. Whenever you're going to engage into developing a process for your innovation to become a product, you need to keep in mind that it needs to be scalable and that the technologies that will be used are actually available and industrial. Once again, this is one of the benefits you get from working with a trusted partner that's going to provide structured data protocols, but that's also going to make sure that the technology that's being used is robust and will be able to live well with your product until the clinical phases. Same for analytical method qualification step. The document that we receive usually are ICH compliant already, even in the early development phase. So any transfer is much easier. You avoid surprises and mistakes. Quickly, how to engage with NRC. Of course, you can pick up the phone. That's one easy way. But I guess that going to different conferences, you'll have multiple experts from NRC that are going to be present. Participating in this type of webinar is also a nice way to get the names in. Don't hesitate to send them an email. Last one is also through your CDMO. Canadian CDMO are usually connected to NRC and can also help you get in touch with them. Quick word on financing. Gail and Jennifer touched base with it, but I want to bring an extra layer to it. Aside from the cost of working with a CDMO, you need to see financing and partnering with a CDMO. It's a collaboration. Okay, so you need to start discussing early with the CDMO to start building your financing structure. Most financing today do not cover the entire process or project. Okay, you're going to be facing step financing. Okay, so the project will need to be segmented, and the cost that your investors are going to be putting in are going to come by phase. So you need to understand that it's not a one shot, I need 4 or 5 million. It's a step by step. And for that, you need to have a CDMO or a partner that's able to break the pieces and match them with what your investors are going to be expecting. Okay. Engage as early as possible. Don't wait for your financing to be closed before asking for a manufacturing price. You might have very bad surprises for that. Quick word on typical milestone. Technology transfer is usually a very big step, especially if you're using novel technologies. Your investors will want to see that this is transferable to someone else. It's not something that only you can do in your lab. Master cell banking, think of a master cell bank as a GMP asset. Passing the clinical studies as well as phase 1 are all milestones that investors are going to be looking for. The goal for them is to de-risk. So they'll be keeping the money, but they'll release it as you move through the different steps. Last slide quickly. Some things to remember. And I think it's also based on stuff that we've learned through the other sessions. There are no shortcuts in developing a product. Okay, risk assessment is a nice tool, but it needs to be done wisely. It should not be intended to skip steps. And if you ever skip a step, make sure you're well documented and you know why. And I use the formulation study as an example, because trust me, this is usually the one that we try to skip, but then we end up having issues during stability. There are more poorly transferred technologies than there are poor products. We've seen too many projects fail for poor planning with very good products. So we mentioned surrounding yourself with a good team. That's important. Make sure that anything you share with your CDMO is documented, and share as much as you can. I wrote share the good and the bad. We need to know where you failed, so we won't be failing as we're going to be scaling up. Any details that you think might have an importance needs to be mentioned. Okay. And Jennifer also mentioned having a common language. I think it's very important that everybody speaks the same words. You might have, we see this often, some expression when you've been working 10 years on your product. There's some expression that comes, well, they might not mean anything to us. So make sure that we have a common language and we understand each other. And last thing, not every CDMO is the same. Okay, so there's no one-stop shop for every production, every development. Make sure you find the right one for you, and also be aware of the CDMO, which is a me too, that can do anything and everything. Make sure that you find someone that understands your technology and can actually deliver it. And that's the end for me. Thank you. And
Thank you so much for these very informative presentations. So I would now like to invite back our three speakers to have a panel discussion and answer any questions from the audience. So far, I don't see any questions yet. In the meanwhile, maybe the panel members would like to clarify, for example, what can be done when there's any potential deviation, and what is part of your risk mitigation plan in case this may happen.
Okay, well, I guess I can start. If there's a deviation that occurs during manufacturing, the first thing that we do is we start a documentation trail that will document the deviation. You have to do an investigation to figure out the root cause, look at the impact to the product. And a lot of communication can go back and forth with the sponsor during that as well. I think I emphasize transparency, and transparency goes both ways. So it's a transparent pathway of information coming from the sponsor to the CDMO, and also the CDMO back to the sponsor. And we want to make sure that the windows are open and that it's clear what is going on. The way that we always look at it is, this is the sponsor's baby. They have been working on this process for years and years and years. And now they have to trust the CDMO, and they're passing their baby to us to look after. And so if anybody has had kids in daycare and they have a webcam so that you can actually see what's going on, that's the way we want to operate as a CDMO, so that you actually know all the time what's going on, good or bad.
I will add that it's not a question as to when, as to if there's going to be a deviation. It's more as a when. There will be deviation. And to Gail's point, it needs to be documented, but I want to bring back again the importance of the data generated prior to engaging with your CDMO. Is any deviation is much easier to tackle and to get over with if we have access to prior data that will help us make a decision on whether this really affects the product or not. We did talk about critical quality attributes. Deviation criticality is very different on a critical quality attribute as to a non-critical. It's documented the same way, but it's much easier to move forward if we have access to that data.
And sorry, maybe just to bring it back a step for folks that might not be completely on the same page as us when it comes to what is a deviation. So as we were discussing, you're spending all this time in process development to develop a process, right? This process is then immortalized basically in what is the batch production record. And so this is that step-by-step instruction manual that is going to be telling the production operators, so the folks in the GMP facility, exactly what to do and when. And should they not follow an instruction, either through error or through necessity, there's sometimes something called planned deviations. If material doesn't arrive or whatever the case is, this is what then triggers these deviations that both Gail and Cédric were talking about what you do to that or do as a result of that. The one thing I would like to add to that discussion, though, and this is bringing it back to when we were discussing about the importance of auditing the facility, and maybe to your point, Cédric, about you need to find the right CDMO that's right for you. How an organization deals with a deviation is outlined in their quality management plan as part of their quality management system. And when you're auditing one of these facilities, you want to be looking at that and understanding not only that they have the appropriate one in place for what it is that you are doing, but more importantly, you want to see examples of them properly following their own systems, because this is another issue. That's what you're really looking for when you're doing an audit. So, if you have a deviation in production, because you would have already audited the facility, because you would have already audited their systems and their ability to follow their own systems, then you know that that deviation is being dealt with appropriately.
Another question is, when the sponsor does a tech transfer to a CDMO, is it possible for anyone in the sponsor's company or lab to go actually and visit the CDMO and to be present during the tech transfer?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, again, as part of that audit, you should have already come on site to come visit our facilities. So that could have been one of the first interactions, physical interactions you had. But, we've had experience where we've had people physically come on site to show us exactly how they do things, because oftentimes too, you might do some steps without actually realizing you're doing steps that may not be captured in a study protocol. That's what we want to see. And then we would actually put that into the writing, into the study protocol. There are instances too that, during production, I know when we had, we were the sponsor for a drug, we went on site while it was undergoing the aseptic fill. So we were actually present on site when that activity was happening. And it's not uncommon for partners to want to audit a specific production day.
I'd like to add that it's even more valuable when you're transferring specific technologies. We're doing complex biologics. Sometimes means that there's equipment coming, there's new probes, new ways of testing stuff. So like having the customer on site to explain to us, as Jennifer mentioned, and to be able to ask questions and narrow down the fine details of the procedure. The downside to it is there needs to be a period where we define what's good enough for the handover to be carried out. So I think there needs to be a balance between the two, where, as Gail says, well, it's your baby. There needs to be that step also where you need to trust the other person to take care of the baby. But it's there again, it's a partnership, it's a discussion, and that discussion needs to happen with the client.
Yeah, and I think during tech transfer, it's really training the people working at the CDMO on how to do your process. And that's where a lot of the lessons learned during the R&D can be transferred, so that you can lead towards a very robust process in the end. And that's the end goal for everything. And there's nothing like a face-to-face in some of that. It's hard to send an email and transfer all that information.
So thankfully the pandemic has passed now, and then we can go on site again, right, with our partners.
Yes.
So I just wanted to come back to Mr. Héroux, his presentation. We have had the pleasure to work together with Biodextris for several projects, and I really want to say that it's an absolute pleasure working with you, and it's also a great pleasure working with Dr. Kweisi's team. I don't know, Gail, if NRC already has collaborations with you too, but I'm sure it's not going to take long. So no, it's an absolute pleasure. And talking about the pandemic, we found at NRC that there's not only negative consequences from a pandemic, for example, a backlog that we all have to deal with, but also positive consequences, for example, new partnership, accelerating procedures, etc. And do you find that from a CDMO perspective, you had similar experiences?
Yeah, I think definitely for us, I mentioned that we received funding to purchase a robotic aseptic fill finish system. And I think it was definitely the pandemic that brought that about. I think it's really highlighted biomanufacturing. Maybe we weren't discussed so much before the pandemic. And I think now it's, we've been here all along and now we just might be a little more visual than we used to be.
Yeah, I echo that last point. I mean, we were all aware of the important role that biomanufacturing played, especially as a growing number of drugs that got market approval were biologics. And prior to the pandemic, there was already a global shortage of facilities that could manufacture these living drugs, which was only exacerbated with COVID. And frankly, in Canada, I think it was quite the wake-up call for us that we really did not have sufficient domestic biomanufacturing capacity. So, you know, there's been a number of very large investments that have been made to build out on facilities, existing facilities, such as mine and Gail's, as well as building new facilities like the NRC to build out that capacity so that we do have the ability to not only innovate, but also translate these innovations into things that are safe and suitable to be tested in the clinic.
Being in the industry, I mean, we were in the vaccine industry 20 years ago. So sadly, but the pandemic brought some attention to the work we're doing. So in that sense, I think it brought benefit to us. Also, of course, we are a private company, which is different from the different funding you might be exposed to. But what the pandemic brought was really that sense of partnership between the industry and the government and even academic, where suddenly we weren't seen only as the bad guys only there for the money. There's value for us to be in that process, and I think you've seen it. And same on your side is we don't see your manufacturing capacities or your expertise as it's not fighting against us. It's actually it adds to our value because you can speed up and you have maybe a broader bandwidth than we do, but and also it helps making sure that the right projects are being transferred, not just any project, and which would be a waste of money for everybody.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because our mission is really to support the academics and the SMEs in Canada and to help build up the ecosystem. So we're never here to compete with any SME or academic, because in fact, if a partner comes to us with a question and we know that some SME or academic actually uses this technology already or is able to provide this service already, then we just refer to this potential partner already. So.
But on that point, though, just to say, you know, even within academic facilities like mine and Gail's, you know, we do have different focuses. But I think, again, what the pandemic has taught us is that we need purposeful and functional redundancy within the ecosystem, right? So to both your points as well, this complementarity, it's very important, right? Because there isn't one group that's going to be able to do everything that the country needs. And so by having these partnerships and collaborations already established, it makes it that much more feasible for us to be able to press play in the event of another global health emergency where we need biomanufacturing capacity.
Yeah, again, completely agree. Team sport, not just within the project, but in the whole ecosystem.
Totally.
And in the last presentation, it was also mentioned that it's important to look for financial, for funding for your development, right? Because it can get quite expensive. And would you like to comment on potential timelines and costs, but very vague numbers? Because a development can take maybe 2 to 4 or 5 years. And in your experience, how much time and what is an approximate cost? Just to set the expectations a little bit with the audience.
Maybe I could tackle that one first. So the first thing I just want to say is that don't be afraid of the cost. It's going to be a lot. It's a lot more than, for the academic audience members here. It's a lot more than what you probably anticipate, but knowledge is power. Knowing how much you need to manufacture what it is you want us to manufacture will allow you then to craft out a plan how to secure the funds, whether it's through, piecing together a number of grants or, looking to start a company or what have you. You can't be afraid of that price tag, and you won't know that price tag until you engage a CDMO. So to Cédric's point, and Gail, I think mentioned this too in our presentation, engaging with us early helps you figure that sort of thing out. One thing that I think my takeaway that I want to give you is that when you're looking for a CDMO, though, and in an effort to reduce cost, look for someone who has already developed a process for what you need, because that, again, will allow you to save a lot of time and a lot of money. Does it mean that that process is the perfect process for your product? Probably not. But because you already have a baseline established, you could look to make small improvements on the upstream or the downstream and get what you need. And the other thing just to remember is that sometimes good enough, especially for early phase clinical trials, is good enough. Could you make the process better? Absolutely. But at that point in time, you don't know that there's any clinical benefit to making that process better. So that's why when we were talking a bit about the different types of CDMOs, it's so important to realize that these more nimble early phase clinical manufacturing facilities are very much geared towards that. Getting what's good enough to get you through the door, to have that clinical trial, and then figure out, okay, for the next stage, let's make this better on these sorts of parameters, more higher dosage or number of doses, etc.
Yeah, and I think I would add to, like, it is expensive. Materials are expensive, clean room time is expensive, staff is expensive. But what you can do, I think, is concentrate on reducing costs by taking the time to plan appropriately. If you rush in and do things, you might be repeating things. So don't underestimate the planning and getting the expertise up front so that you don't have to repeat things because you made a regulatory mistake. So yeah, I think we can't do a lot to reduce the costs in the end of the actual production costs, but that's where you can save money is by that upfront work.
So we're not in the cell and gene therapy. We're more in the protein expression and other expression system. But just to give rough numbers, an expression system that would be bacterial based could easily climb up to $3 million from the time the process is transferred to let's say a phase 1 clinical batch, including an analytical package and stability program. Okay, but I would say that's a baseline to keep in mind. Cell-based will rise up to 5 million at least. So just giving numbers. Obviously, if you're in the monoclonal antibody, you might be looking, as Jennifer says, as to someone that already has a process that does it. So you're going to save a huge amount of time and money by doing this. Because you're not going to go through a full-scale development, and you should be planning at least 1.5 years from the process transfer to your preclinical batch. There might be some benefits in having the preclinical and the clinical blood very squeezed, but 1.5 years to 2 years is what we often see with our clients.
And for cell therapy costing, it's really process dependent because every process is so different. If it's an autologous product versus allogenic, the length of the process is really going to make a difference, and the cost of goods. So we can have a process that lasts 5 days. We can have a process that lasts 4 weeks. So when it's like building a house, if you're going to build a house, how many rooms do you want? And do you want granite countertops? So that's another reason for engaging a CDMO early, and just looking at scope of work, especially if you're putting in grants. That's going to be important for you to have at least a ballpark idea of how much it cost.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm afraid our time is up. I would like to thank you so much for these clear presentations and for this great advice. And I would like to thank the audience for attending this session and the 2 previous sessions. I also invite you to visit our websites and contact us for further information. And we hope to have the opportunity to look into a partnership opportunity with you in the near future. Finally, we would like to ask you to please complete the survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of this session, and your feedback will be very valuable. So thank you all very much and have a great day.
Okay.